Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We are just letting people in through the waiting room, letting everyone get connected. Welcome to our second expertise. Everyone is really super welcome. I'll give us a couple of minutes before I get started and introduce our speakers for today, because there are still a couple of folks connecting and joining. So in the meantime, I will just pop the link to our expertise website in the chat. There's also a link that I'll follow this up with to our YouTube channel. And that's for anyone who you think is perhaps interested in these talks or research into climate change, but who doesn't have a Glasgow account. They can catch the live stream via YouTube. So I'm really just filling airspace here while I let people in. All right, that seems to be settling. So I'm just going to kick us off because we only have an hour. So as I said, welcome everyone to the second installment of Expertise. I'm Dr. Connolly Panagopoulos. I am one of the founders of Expertise along with Caitlin, who you can't see at the moment because she's doing all the streaming and the techie stuff behind the scenes. And you might have come to the last Expertise last month that looked a little bit at the research being done around the university on mental health. So in keeping with Expertise, which is really this sort of multidisciplinary talk series where every month we cover a different theme and look at some of the research being done throughout the university from master students, undergrads, etc.
Thank you. I will present my slides. Can everyone see? Okay. I will start. Can everyone see the slides?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Camilla Carlesi, and today I will present to you my research, which is on exploring the link between climate change and terrorist recruitment. As you can already see from the title, these are two very different fields of studies. And for this reason, I was very curious to kind of link them and see if there is a connection between the two. So the overall presentation will first introduce my research question, because the two fields are very broad, and so I have focused on a very narrow area. Then I will introduce why these topics are relevant and how they are influencing the policy making of our states. And later I will introduce all the evidence that helped me to arrive to the conclusion that I have gathered. These will be maps and interviews on the field. And at the end of the presentation, I will introduce how all these research can help us to understand also the future of policymaking and the future of terrorism and climate change. As I said, I have focused on a narrow research question. This is the following. Are draft and water shortages likely to help ISIS recruitment in the Middle East in the coming decade? This research that I have done has actually helped me to understand that draft and water shortages are linked to ISIS recruitment because they have fueled ISIS recruitment in the past. And for this reason, they will also help ISIS recruitment in the coming decade. Why is this topic so important to study? I believe that through understanding how ISIS recruitment works and what are the rhetoric of the recruiters to enlarge their membership, it is very important to then help to mitigate terrorist tactics and terrorism in general. Also, it is essential to investigate this topic because by understanding that climate change is helping terrorism, states that are currently putting climate change at the bottom of their agendas may be persuaded to put climate change at the very top of their agendas and try to mitigate it because they see it as a security issue, which also will help violence to decrease and also terrorist recruitment to decrease. Before starting my actual research, I just want to outline all the factors that are helping extremism, civil war, and violence in the Middle East, which is the region, as I said, that I have focused on, starting from the worst environmental situation, which is very degrading in the Middle East. This factor has led to a decrease of arable land. And then knowing that the Middle East is heavily relying on agriculture to work, then we can understand that in this region, there was a very increased unemployment. Increased unemployment, of course, has led a lot of political discontent. People have been losing their faith in the government and in the restoration of their jobs. And through this, there has been a rise in extremism, civil war, and violence. Of course, all these sentiments have led to state failure. State failure also means the inability of governments to respond to the needs of their citizens. In particular, in the case of climate change, there has been a decrease or a complete absence of mitigation strategies, which of course has led to a worse environmental situation. So overall, we can already grasp that there is a link between the worst environmental situation, extremism, civil war, and violence, because they are both fueling each other in this kind of vicious cycle where each factor is a threat multiplier of each other. In particular, going in my research and in my findings, I have, as I said, analyzed maps and on the field interviews. The first map that I will show you is this one. It shows the draft severity by country. It is very clear that draft severity that is highlighted as the worst with the color dark red is very present in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa region. So just by looking at this map, we can see that drafts are mostly present in the world in the MENA region. If we go and look also at water shortages, this is the other map that I looked at, where the worst water shortages are emphasized with the color light blue. So you can see that with light blue is the places where water shortages are the worst in the world. We can see that there are exactly the same countries that are emphasized in the map. In particular, I have pointed out Tunisia, Libya, and Saudi Arabia. This is because I will show you later another map that emphasizes that the same countries are the countries where ISIS recruitment has been the most successful. So by establishing this link, we can see that there is actually a direct connection between the two. Before going there, I just want to make you understand better what absolute water scarcity means. So in this tank, you can see that it can be filled with 500 cubic meters of water. This is the amount of water that people that are living with in extreme water scarcity are living with. So absolute water scarcity means this amount of water or even less per year. If you think about the fact that the people that have been led into joining ISIS are living with this very short amount of water, you can start to understand why they have been convinced to join such organization, not because of their ideals, but rather because they were desperate because of the conditions caused by climate change. Going back into the link between the two, you can see the map of ISIS recruitment locations. So in dark red here, you can see the countries where ISIS has been the most successful into recruiting its members. As I said before, these are Tunisia, Libya, and Saudi Arabia, which are exactly the same countries where water shortages are the worst in the whole world. This is a comparison between the two maps, just to help you visualize it better. Exactly the same countries that are in dark red, where ISIS has been the most successful, are also the countries where water shortages are the worst. Despite this overlap between the two maps, we can still think that this is purely a coincidence that the two are linked. In order to investigate whether or not this is a coincidence, I have looked at interviews in the field that have been conducted by asking to farmers that have witnessed ISIS recruitment in the Middle East. So among all the interviews, I picked the one carried out by the National Geographic. The National Geographic has carried out more than 100 interviews in the regions that were invaded by ISIS. They were mainly asking to people why their friends, their families were led into joining the organization. To all of these questions, farmers and people living there all replied that climate change was one of the main reasons why they were led into joining the organization. This is because they were unemployed and they saw ISIS as the only employment opportunity that they had other than farming, since their fields were completely ruined by climate change. So in all these interviews, one of the most fascinating example is the one of Samarra in Iraq that was conducted in 2009. This episode is key to understand the link between the two because witnesses have stated that ISIS would enter in the city every time that episodes of droughts and water shortages would occur. This means that recruiters were actually waiting for climate change to be in its worst of its conditions to enter and appeal the most desperate looking people into joining their organization. To understand better, I also have some quotes from the people living there or activists working in the area. The first one is the following: join us and you'll never have to worry about feeding your family. So if we understand that these people were desperate and these were the things that they were listening from the ISIS recruiters, we can understand why their desperate situation has convinced them and persuaded them into joining the organization. The recruiters were also stating things like the following. They were luring them with salaries. They told them that they would conquer all the lands to Burma, meaning that they were not only offering them employment opportunities, but they were also giving them rewards for joining their association, all things that were highly appealing to people that were so desperate and living in such desperate conditions. In total, a human rights activist living in the region witnessed that about 5,000 farmers from the most damaged areas of Iraq joined ISIS. This means that ISIS was not just very successful into exploiting and persuading people into joining their organization, but it was also very fast into growing a lot of their members. So in general, all this research that we've seen, all this evidence can help us to understand that ISIS has been exploiting climate change related grievances in the Middle East in the past. Why is this relevant to us today? Because in the future, as we know, if we don't take action immediately, parts of the Middle East may become uninhabitable as other parts of the world. And this will only open up more opportunities for terrorist organization. In my research, I have focused on ISIS, which could actually grow in the future thanks to these climatological grievances. However, other organizations that are already existing may exploit the same grievances, or even new organizations may be born as a consequence of such grievances. If we think about the fact that each year today, 61 new terrorist organizations emerge, this number, together with worse climate condition, could only lead to more organizations that are created. So in general, we can understand that by tackling the issue of climate change, we are not just helping the environment, but we're also helping our security because we are decreasing violence and we are decreasing the appeal that terrorist organizations are currently using to grow their membership. Thank you for your time and listening to me. Now I'm open for questions.
Thanks so much, Camilla. That was brilliant. I had the pleasure of mentoring Camilla along with another member of the team, Dr. Julia Bowman, who I'm just going to pass on to chair the next part of this.
Thank you so much, Camilla.
speaker, as is tradition with expertise, is from a radically different field. He is in his 4th year in the College of Science and Engineering. And I'll just pass now to yourself, Thomas.
Perfect, thank you. I'll do my best to share the slides without any hassle. Can everyone say that okay so far?
Yep.
Perfect. So hi everyone, yeah, thank you so much for coming today. I guess the first thing I'm going to have to do is reassure you that despite the title, this is actually an interesting talk. I think it's a fair assumption to say that most of you probably don't go about your daily life thinking about batteries or energy storage all that much. And I know certainly I didn't when I started this. I was actually looking at public transport and how we could kind of change our way of looking around moving in and around cities and moving away from these non-renewable sources. And actually the key technology we really had to work on was batteries. And then when you look at batteries as a whole, there's so much more that they can be used to really help us move into a carbon neutral, renewable future. So the first important thing to look at is, why do we actually need batteries? So the important thing really, especially for climate change, is emission reduction. So I'm sure you're all aware of like Teslas and stuff like that, electric cars. These are really quite key in our renewable revolution. So for electric vehicles, for example, for Teslas, I think about 30% of Europe's emissions were road vehicles. So if we can start moving towards these kind of battery powered cars, we would actually be able to then move towards a cleaner version of all of that. But the problem is then, do they charge from renewable grid energy or do they charge from non-renewable coal plants? So what we actually need as well is battery solutions for the grid. At the moment, the way grid energy works is kind of shown on the right here, where we have a baseload energy that we always have to meet, where that's used for street lights and hospitals and, you know, the plugs in our walls. And we need to make sure this is actually hit. So to do that, we currently use coal plants and oil plants and, you know, natural gas, because these are really quite reliable. Whereas renewable sources, in contrast, are really, really variable. So what we need is battery technology to help us regulate this output and really help us make sure we always reach this baseload. As well as kind of all of this, one important factor is, with every technology comes new possibilities, new capabilities, things we weren't able to do before. As well as that, there's increased safety, which is a big problem that we face with a lot of our energy today. So what we actually have today, one of the big problems, is lithium-ion batteries. So the way these work, to keep it quite simple, is 2 metal plates, an anode and a cathode, and a liquid electrolyte in the middle that allows the charge to pass. So the way we're going to talk about all these technologies is with pros and cons, so we can see where they fit into the world. So the pros of lithium really are that they're made today. They work today. We all know them. They're in your phones. They're in our cars. They're really quite great. They are very flexible. As I said, phones to cars. We can see there in the bottom right, I've got a diagram of how they put the batteries into a Tesla Model S. And as well as that, these batteries have been around for quite a bit of time. So we've had the time to really develop their efficiency and get them really quite high. This term round trip efficiency, we'll use it quite a lot. It just means what percentage of the energy we put into a battery do we then get back out. The real problems with lithium start coming with the way we have to use them. So we can see there on the bottom right, if we want a big lithium battery, we actually need to stack together lots of smaller batteries. The problem then with that is, if one of these batteries starts getting really hot, the ones around it will also get hot and just end up feeding back into it, ending up in a kind of thermal runaway problem where they exponentially get hotter and hotter and hotter. And then the problem is then when it burns, the electrolyte in these batteries is really flammable and very toxic. And with lithium burning, especially, it creates its own oxidizer. So the fire is essentially fueling itself, which is a huge problem. There's been a couple of notable big lithium fires in the world. As well as that, there's some problems with the batteries degrading over time. I'm sure you know in your phone after a year or two that the batteries become less and less effective as you use it more and more often. And then beyond that, the batteries are just too heavy to be used in, you know, larger vehicles, so buses and trains, or, you know, an aircraft or anything like that. So now that I've bummed you out and I've taken you down the really depressing all the problems of today route, we're going to start looking at the kind of positive, what can we do, what's the future? So what we need solutions for are large scale citywide energy storage to kind of regulate the renewable generation. We then need some solutions for large vehicles, so like buses or public transport and, you know, aircraft, that sort of thing. And then we need to look at what improvements we can make for personal vehicles and make sure that they're cheaper and reliable and far safer. So to start big, and then we'll work our way small, we're going to look at redox flow batteries first. These are essentially just two big tanks of liquid, and they are working today. You can see these in Dalian in China. They're making more in Shanghai, and there's a couple that have been running since 2015 in Hokkaido in Japan. And these are really easily scalable, unlike lithium. So if you want to store more charge, you can just build bigger tanks or more of these large kind of facilities. They're a lot safer than lithium as well. Even though the analyte and the catholyte are still toxic, I wouldn't drink them. They're not flammable. So you get that real big boost in safety. Beyond that as well, we get the kind of the recyclable side where the metals used inside do require heavy mining, but we can recycle what's in it and help give the battery second life, as well as the battery lasting longer than lithium. So there's a lot less waste generated. As well as this, it works in high and low temperatures. So with lithium, we need to be really careful with our temperature regulation to prevent fires, whereas redox flow batteries can kind of work wherever, which really helps us tackle the global problem of climate change as a global community, make sure everyone has at least the ability to. These aren't perfect, obviously, nothing I talk about will be. These do have a lower efficiency than lithium, which interestingly means just that little 10% makes redox flow batteries more expensive to run in the short term. Over long term, you don't have to replace them or maintain them as much, but that short-term cost makes them quite a difficult sell for, you know, smaller governments, for councils, that sort of thing. As well as that, these are very much exclusively for the grid. They are very heavy batteries. We are definitely not putting any of these on aircraft. So then to kind of move on then from this to something maybe a bit more science fiction sounding is the hydrogen fuel cell. The way these work is really, really quite cool, where we use electricity, preferably generated by renewable sources, to split the hydrogen and oxygen in water. We can then move the hydrogen around through pipelines or trucks or, you know, any other kind of conventional means of transport, and then reintroduce it to oxygen in a hydrogen generator. This will then combine and release the electricity again and give us some water as a byproduct. So we don't even have fumes to worry about. And the really great thing about this is the flexibility. No matter what the hydrogen is used for, it's the same hydrogen, whether we put it in a huge citywide generator or a small remote village using it, you know, a small hydrogen generator, or, you know, in a bus like the one I've shown there from Aberdeen. You know, it's really flexible. And as far as energy is concerned, flexibility is king. And it's as well, unlike most of the other technologies, really, really well suited for large vehicles and aircraft. One of the studies I saw showed about by 2050, we might expect almost 40% of Europe's aviation fleet to be hydrogen, which is really quite exciting. The big cons with hydrogen really just come down to infrastructure. It comes down to making it cost effective, making it a competitive source. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem where it's difficult to, no one wants to build the infrastructure and take on the high cost before anyone's actually going to be buying any of the hydrogen. And no one wants to use any hydrogen vehicles until the actual fuel source itself is, you know, competitive, is cheap enough. So there's a lot of problems with infrastructure, and we'll see on the next slide, I've got a great graph that kind of showcases how this is a problem. The other real issue for hydrogen is its low efficiency. So part of this is to do with the infrastructure problem, but there's a lot more work needs to be done to make hydrogen a worthwhile source of energy. So here, this is from an excellent paper, makes for great Sunday afternoon reading, I promise, all about the future of the hydrogen economy. And this is the Valley of Death, which is any real company or any country that wants to invest in hydrogen is going to have about 10 to 15 years of almost nothing but loss. And after that, everyone benefits. It's a really good ecosystem of, economics. But before then, it's a huge cost. The way some countries like Germany are really leading against this is to start in public transport, kind of like we are here in Scotland, where buses and trains all refuel at the same central points, and then expanding out into urban centres so that people using cities and highways have access to hydrogen fuel, and then expanding further out into suburbia and then into more rural areas until eventually it's more or less the sole fuel source, or at least that's the plan of the German government. But this isn't the perfect solution. Hydrogen's amazing, it's really cool, but we can't use hydrogen in a phone. So to look at kind of the future of our small scale solutions and what we can use for personal vehicles, we need to look at solid state batteries, which are kind of like the eventual successor of lithium ion. So the only real difference between this and a conventional lithium ion battery is the solid electrolyte in the middle, which might seem like a smallish kind of change, but actually some of the chemical changes in that are really, really good. So one is it works in a huge variety of temperatures, as we said. That was a problem before. So that really helps with the safety in electric vehicles. They're a lot smaller as well, which for the climate is a nice plus, but not too important. For tech like medical technology, it's really, really important and really, really good. The other thing as well is there's a lot of research to show that these will charge really, really quickly for really, really high capacity. Some of the headlines I saw were like 500-mile car on a single charge, or your phone lasting 5 days on a minute. The problem is with that, if you look at the actual papers, it does kind of back them up, but these are the highest estimates with like the highest uncertainties. So whenever you see a headline, always treat it with a little bit of skepticism. The real problem with solid state is that it just can't quite be cost effective for large scale. At least that's not how it's looking at the moment. So a lot of work needs to be done on trying that, but with other solutions that do exist, chances are, I'd imagine solid state will stay relatively small scale. The other problem is solid state batteries are very much still in the research prototype stage. Toyota were meant to release a kind of prototype solid state battery car in the Tokyo Summer Olympic Games. For reasons I'm sure we're all far, far, far too aware of, we might have to wait just a little bit longer for that. So now we've kind of looked at all the batteries I wanted to talk about. Let's just zoom out again and think about the original problems I brought up. So as far as the large scale solutions go, really redox flow batteries, be it vanadium or organic, which is an option the EU is trying to fund a lot of right now, they'll be really great because they can be plugged into the energy grid as is already. Hydrogen batteries as well would be amazing for large scale storage, but that infrastructure problem really hits when other batteries do have the advantage. We might still see as well, on large scales, lithium arrays, but I think they will gradually over time become less popular. For large vehicles and aviation, hydrogen really is king here, especially because these are usually vehicles where the infrastructure problem isn't quite as difficult. So this really helps hydrogen in that sense. And it's not got the same weight problems associated with redox flow batteries or lithium ion. As well as that, on the medium kind of scale of vehicles, we might see lithium ion solid state batteries kind of coming in and pulling up some of it. And then on the personal vehicle scale, I think lithium ion and solid state are definitely going to be there. They have the industry, they have the infrastructure, which really helps. It's a lot easier to change the existing gigafactories for Tesla to make it solid state batteries than it is to build whole new factories and whole new pipelines for hydrogen. So now we've kind of looked at that, I guess. Thank you very much for your time and listening. Does anyone have any questions? I'll do my best.
Thanks so much, Thomas. That was fascinating. And I love your disclaimer on the last slide that you you cannot see in the future.
I know I've tried really hard to look in the future, but alas.
I think all researchers should have that disclaimer on any research papers. We had
joining us again from social sciences, and she's in her 4th year. And I'm going to pass you now to Sabrina.
Thank you, Maxine. I'm gonna try to share my screen. Can you all see this okay?
Yep.
Great. Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sabrina, and I'm in my 4th year of politics. And I've done my research. In my research, I looked at the 2 environmental movements, Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion, and how the 2 construct environmental changes as threats to our security. So in order to introduce the theory that I applied for my research a little bit more, I'm going to talk about COVID-19, which unfortunately is a topic that we're all familiar with. So it was interesting to look at how COVID entered our lives and started to play such a big role in media and politics, when just over a year ago, nobody had any idea about what this was. And partly we came to know this issue and we came to fear this issue because the way politicians talked about it and what words they used to describe it. So I've got some quotes here from, for example, Boris Johnson last March. He describes the coronavirus as the biggest threat this country has faced for decades, and he calls it an invisible killer. So clearly, this is something we have to fear. This is something that is threatening us and our lives, and we must do everything we can to fight it. And in the second quote, you can see Giuseppe Conte, the Prime Minister of Italy, saying that we must all give something up, and we have to do it now because of the urgency of this issue. And because if we don't act now, it will be too late. We will be losing lives and it will be too late to tackle it. And as the third quote shows, the third quote by Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, she says that we have to do what we're being asked to do to protect our health and our fellow citizens, which means that we are okay with the emergency measures like lockdown or businesses closing, because we understand the urgency of this and we don't question it, because this is the way that we perceive this issue as a threat to our lives. Obviously, it's not just because of the words used to describe coronavirus in media, newspapers, and by politicians and people in general. We obviously had such a huge scientific evidence basis to show the impact of this virus and the urgency with which we had to tackle it. So it's not just the discourse that constructs a threat. In my research, I focused on environmental non-governmental organizations, and in particular 2 that became really, really popular in recent years. And these are Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, which you may have heard of. So the first one, Extinction Rebellion, was founded in the UK in 2019 after the publication of the really alarming report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change the same year, warning about the dangers of keeping the current level of temperature rising. The movement now counts 650 groups around the world. And in April 2019, they organized the biggest protest in London, pictured here, called Rebellion Week, in which they parked a pink boat in Oxford Circus to show the alarming rise of sea levels. The second one is Fridays for Future, and I think we all recognize the girl in the picture. Her name is Greta, and she founded the movement in 2019, which started as a solitary protest outside the Swedish parliament in Stockholm. But it's now regarded as the largest climate movement in history. And as of September 2019, it organized the largest climate protest in history, counting over 4 million people around the world. So for these reasons, I decided to analyze these two movements, and the timeframes I chose were September 2019 for Fridays for Future and April 2019 for Extinction Rebellion, in which they recorded their largest protests. So what I did was looking at how the two movements use words to construct climate change as a threat to our security, just like politicians did with COVID-19. And it was really interesting, first of all, because obviously the two movements don't have access to traditional mass media like newspapers and television. So they had to use alternative platforms to reach people and to put their message through. So what I did was looking at Twitter and Instagram, because both movements have a huge follower bases, counting millions of people. So these were the main platforms through which they could make their claims and use words to describe climate change as a threat to our security. And what I found was really interesting. I have some quotes here. So Extinction Rebellion on Twitter wrote in April 2019, they said that the Earth is being killed by government inaction. So you can see that they're using the same words used by Boris Johnson to describe such a deadly issue like COVID-19. They use it to describe the lack of climate policies to tackle climate change. And in the second quote, which is taken from Greta Thunberg's famous speech at the UN Climate Summit in September 2019, she says that people are dying and we are in the beginning of a mass extinction, which really conveys a sense of danger, and it portrays climate change as a threat to people's lives. And the third one, Greta stresses to listen to the scientists, because these are not just claims that the two organizations are making. There's a huge scientific base here as well to back up these claims. And this is almost like a chant that we are encouraged to repeat and to learn. Yeah, another interesting strategy that the two organizations use to really raise awareness of the dangers of climate change is picturing young people, so emphasizing young people. Whereas traditional climate change movements like Greenpeace, for example, they generally portray endangered species like pandas or polar bears, as you can see in this slide. The two movements, Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, on the other hand, emphasize that what is endangered now is not some animal that lives far away in the Antarctic region, which is still super important to protect, obviously, but it's young people's future. So it's our kids, our grandkids, most of us really, that are in danger here. So it's something closer to us, and they're appealing to a sense of protection in order to really take meaningful action to protect young people's futures. And also it's really interesting because unlike pandas and polar bears, young people can take on the streets. They have a voice, they're protesting, and they are the ones that are trying to raise awareness and make politicians hear their demands and take meaningful action against climate change. Yeah, so the question is, have their attempts been successful? Well, as you can see from the picture, they have mobilized millions of people around the world after just a few months that the two organizations were born. So yes, they have been really successful in terms of mass mobilization and getting people to join them. And, you know, it's the first time in history that we see so many people protesting for a climate issue, which is amazing to see. And also, there has been, right after the protests in April 2019 from Extinction Rebellion, organized by Extinction Rebellion, there has been a change, a more open attitude of politicians. They have been able to meet with the mayor of London to discuss their demands. And we also saw both the Scottish government and the Welsh government declaring a climate emergency right after the protest, which is a really good sign. It had never happened before. And also we've seen a massive change in discourse, especially in the European Union press, in which they mention extensively the two movements and how important it is for European citizens to fight climate change. So yes, they have been successful in this sense. However, we can see that politicians are still not adopting the same discourse, so they don't see and portray climate change as something urgent, something that we must tackle now, because there's always something else that comes first that's at the top of the political agenda. So for example, in 2007, 2008, it was the global financial crisis, and then right after it was migration, and now obviously COVID and the economic crisis that comes with it. So climate change is still fighting to be on top of the political agenda worldwide, but this doesn't mean that we're not taking the right steps. Although small, there has been a raise in public awareness, and politicians are being more open, and they're slowly adopting more meaningful policy. So there's hope here that we are taking the right steps to fight this issue. Yeah, here are the sources that I use if you're interested. And yeah, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please do send them in the chat or just shout them out.
Thanks so much, Sabrina. Another fascinating talk here. So just to remind everyone and the people that have joined us, the way you can ask questions is